Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to HOA and Karen's Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? I built a road on my own land just to keep my farm alive, so how did a neighborhood HOA manage to block it overnight with a steel gate, a keypad, and a monthly fee like they suddenly own my livelihood? Why was there a camera pointed straight at my face as if they were hoping I would explode on cue, and when I refused to give them the reaction they wanted, how did the pressure quietly spread from HOA emails to county paperwork to suppliers backing out without warning? Most people think this story is about a gate, but what if the gate was only bait and the real trap was buried in silence, delays, and documents? My name is Jake Carter, and I run a working farm on the north edge of Clearbrook County where the paved roads thin out and real land begins. This farm is not a side project or a retirement hobby. It is how my family survives. It is early mornings, broken equipment, tight margins, and a calendar ruled by seasons instead of meetings. My wife, Emily, and I do not have investors to fall back on. We have soil, contracts, and the kind of responsibility that does not pause when someone else feels inconvenienced. The trouble began quietly, the way it always does when a subdivision grows too close to something it does not understand. Clearbrook Meadows was built nearby, all clean sidewalks and matching mailboxes, and with it came an HOA that loved rules more than results. At first, it was polite suggestions about dust, then comments about noise, then letters that never raised their voice but somehow still felt threatening. Heavy vehicles were discouraged during certain hours, traffic was being monitored, disturbances were being documented. The hours they wanted silence just happened to be the hours a farm has to function. I tried to cooperate. I slowed down. I waved. I scheduled deliveries at dawn and late evening. I ran equipment when I should have been sleeping. None of it mattered because the issue was never really dust or sound. It was control. They did not like that I existed next to them without asking permission. That was why I built the road. The original access route had been there long before the HOA ever existed, but they kept interfering and every delay cost money I did not have to lose. So I cleared brush, graded dirt, hauled gravel, and paid for every inch myself. Emily calculated drainage like an engineer. A friend of mine, Tyler Brooks, came out on weekends to help set culverts and move rock. It was slow, exhausting work, but when it was done, I finally felt relief. The road worked. I could move feed, equipment, and deliveries without crossing their neighborhood. That relief lasted exactly one morning. I rounded the bend near the tree line and slammed on the brakes so hard my coffee almost hit the windshield. A steel gate stood across the road, heavy and freshly installed, sunk into new concrete. There was a keypad bolted on at eye level and a small black camera angled perfectly toward where a driver's face would be. A clean white sign was mounted beside it, neat and professional, authorized vehicles only. Below that, in bold letters, was a line that made my stomach tighten. Road access fee, $300 per month. And at the bottom, almost like an afterthought, was the name of a company I had never heard of, Access Management LLC. I stood there longer than I care to admit, not because I was confused, but because I understood exactly what they were doing. They wanted me angry. They wanted me on camera. They wanted me yanking the gate or shouting so they could frame me as the problem. I had the equipment to tear it down in minutes, and every part of me wanted to do it, but I did not touch it. I turned around and went home, because sometimes the worst mistake you can make is giving someone exactly the reaction they are hoping for. Emily knew something was wrong the moment she saw my face. I told her everything. That night, Tyler came over, and we sat at the kitchen table staring out into the dark, where that gate sat like a challenge. Everyone we talked to said the same thing. Tear it down. Pull it out. Do it now. But strength is not about who can break something first. Strength is knowing when someone is setting a trap. So instead of chains, we brought out paperwork. Emily opened her laptop. I stacked old surveys, easement records, and county plats. Tyler leaned over the table as we worked through documents in silence. That silence broke when Emily froze and turned the screen toward us. Access Management LLC was newly registered. No history, no real presence. Just an address, a house. Not an office, not a business park. A residential address. That was when the situation stopped feeling petty and started feeling deliberate. This was not about a road. It was about leverage. And I did not have much time. I had 7 days before missed deliveries and broken contracts would push the farm past recovery. Emily posted a short video online, calm and factual, just showing the gate, the fee, and the company name. It spread fast. People argued, speculated, and tagged officials. Reporters reached out. I said nothing. The moment you speak, you lose control of how your story is told, and I knew the version they wanted was simple. Angry farmer versus responsible HOA. While the internet talked, the pressure moved quietly. 3 days after the gate went up, a feed delivery did not arrive. When I called, the supplier hesitated before telling me the county had asked them to hold off. That same afternoon, a white county truck rolled onto my property. 2 inspectors walked the road with clipboards, pointing at damp soil like it was evidence. Possible environmental concerns, they said. Temporary hold, they said. No timeline. By evening, buyers started calling with the same careful tone. They did not want trouble. Nobody ever does. The gate had stopped my truck. The paperwork stopped everyone else. That night, as we sat exhausted at the table, a grocery bag appeared hanging from the fence near the old entrance. Inside was a small USB drive. No note, no explanation. Just proof that someone out there knew what the HOA was doing. And that was the moment I realized this was bigger than a gate, bigger than a fee, and bigger than one angry neighborhood. Because people do not start leaving evidence unless they are scared of what happens next. The USB drive sat on the kitchen table like it had weight, even though it was barely bigger than my thumb. None of us touched it for a long moment. Emily stood with her arms folded. Tyler leaned against the counter, and I just stared at it, listening to the house settle the way it always did late at night. That tiny piece of plastic felt more dangerous than the gate, more dangerous than the county truck, because it meant someone inside that system had decided things had gone too far. When I finally plugged it into the laptop, there was no dramatic music or hidden folder nonsense, just files. Emails, PDFs, scanned documents, ordinary-looking stuff that became less ordinary the longer we read. HOA board messages talking openly about forcing compliance. Threads where board members complained that fines were not working fast enough. One message in particular made my jaw tighten. A woman named Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, suggested they apply outside pressure so I would voluntarily come to terms. Outside pressure. That explained the county hold. That explained the suppliers suddenly backing away like I was radioactive. Another document showed the formation paperwork for Access Management LLC with a name I recognized immediately. The registered agent was Karen Whitmore's brother. Same last name. Same address. The company that now charged me $300 a month to use my own road was a shell created by the HOA leadership itself. Emily exhaled slowly, like she was afraid if she breathed too hard the whole thing might fall apart. Tyler shook his head and laughed once, sharp and humorless. "They're not even trying to hide it," he said, but hiding it was exactly what they were doing. They were just counting on me not having the time, money, or energy to fight back properly. They expected me to explode, to rip out the gate, to do something physical they could point to and say, "See? He's the problem." Instead, I went to bed with a notebook full of dates, names, and connections, and the kind of calm that only comes when anger turns into focus. The next morning, the pressure increased. Another supplier called to delay a delivery, then another. Each one used the same careful language, the same uncomfortable pauses. Nobody wanted to say the words out loud, but the message was clear. The county's review had made me untouchable. It did not matter that nothing had changed on the land itself. What mattered was that someone with influence had leaned on the right people. I drove out to the gate again, slow and deliberate. The camera stared back at me, unblinking. I imagined the HOA board sitting somewhere, waiting for a clip of me losing my temper. I stood there quietly for a full minute, then turned around and left. I could almost feel their frustration through the silence. By noon, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA informing me that continued use of the road without paying the access fee would be considered trespassing and subject to enforcement. It was written in that same polite, bloodless language that made everything sound reasonable while doing something completely unreasonable. Emily read it once, then again. "They're escalating," she said. "No," I answered. "They're rushing." That was the tell. People who are confident do not rush. They take their time. They were trying to push me into a corner before I could do anything smart. I called a lawyer that afternoon, not the kind that advertises on billboards, but a local land use attorney named Mark Reynolds, who had grown up around farms and knew the difference between an easement and a threat dressed up as policy. I told him everything, slowly, from the first letter to the USB drive. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Don't touch that gate," he finally said, "and don't say a word to the HOA." "Not yet." "What about the county hold?" I asked. "That's the interesting part," he replied. "Because if what you're telling me is true, they've crossed a line." He came out the next day, walked the road, took photos, read the documents. When he saw the access management paperwork, he let out a low whistle. "That's not just shady," he said. "That's personal." While he worked on filings and calls, the HOA made their next move. They sent out a neighborhood-wide email, painting themselves as concerned community leaders protecting residents from unsafe conditions. They mentioned heavy machinery, environmental risks, and uncooperative landowners. They never used my name, but they did not have to. Everyone knew who they were talking about. Emily's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from strangers. Some supportive, some angry, a few threatening. That was the point. If they could not break me financially, they would try socially. Then the fine started. $100 for unauthorized road use, another for failure to comply, another for hostile conduct, even though I had not spoken to a single board member in weeks. They stacked up fast, like they were daring me to challenge them. At the same time, the county sent a follow-up notice requesting additional documentation, additional inspections, additional delays. Everything took just long enough to hurt. But pressure cuts both ways. Mark filed an emergency injunction request, citing interference with lawful land use and potential conflicts of interest. He attached copies of the HOA emails, the access management filings, the county inspection timeline. He asked for one thing, for the gate to be removed until the matter was resolved. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. The HOA did not like that. 2 nights before the hearing, someone knocked on our door after dark. I opened it to find a man I recognized from HOA meetings, though he had never spoken to me before. His name was Brian. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, eyes darting toward the road. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, "but this has gone too far." He told me Karen had been bragging at a board meeting about how they were finally teaching the farmer a lesson, about how the county owed them favors, about how access management was just a temporary solution until I gave in or gave up. "I didn't sign up for this," Brian said. Most of us didn't. He did not give me documents. He did not give me recordings. He just confirmed what I already knew. This was deliberate, coordinated, and driven by ego. The morning of the hearing, the gate was still there. The fines were still ticking. The deliveries were still stalled, but for the first time since this began, the HOA's confidence cracked. Karen avoided eye contact in the hallway. Their lawyer kept flipping through his notes like he was missing something. When Mark stood up and began laying out the timeline, the connections, and the conflicts, the room shifted. The judge asked questions that did not have easy answers. And when the issue of Access Management LLC came up, Karen's face went pale. The judge did not rule that day. But he did issue a temporary order. The gate was to remain open. No fees, no enforcement, no retaliation. Just like that, the road was mine again. Outside the courthouse, Karen tried to speak to me. I did not stop walking. Because this was never about winning an argument. It was about surviving long enough to expose the truth. And as I drove back toward the farm, past an open gate that should never have existed, I knew this was far from over. Because people who build traps rarely walk away quietly when someone escapes them. The gate being open felt less like a victory and more like a pause, the kind of quiet you get right before something else breaks loose. I drove through slowly, almost expecting someone to step out and tell me it was a mistake, that I had misunderstood, that this was all temporary. But nothing happened. The gravel crunched under the tires the way it was supposed to, and for the first time in weeks, I reached the barn without having to stop, turn around, or explain myself to anyone. Deliveries started moving again almost immediately. Not because the suppliers suddenly grew brave, but because the county's temporary order gave them cover. Trucks rolled in, feed got unloaded, and buyers returned with cautious optimism, like animals testing ground they were not sure was safe yet. The farm breathed again, but the damage had already been done. Missed days cost money. Delays cost trust. Seasons do not wait for legal arguments to finish. The HOA, on the other hand, did not take the pause well. Karen Whitmore sent out another email to the neighborhood, this one longer and more emotional. She talked about being silenced, about outside forces, about how the community was under attack by someone who refused to respect shared values. It was written to sound reasonable, but there was panic under the words. She knew the spotlight had turned, and the spotlight kept widening. The local reporter who had emailed earlier ran the story anyway, careful and well-sourced. He did not frame it as angry farmer versus caring HOA. He framed it as power being used quietly, behind paperwork and polite language. He mentioned the gate, the fees, the company tied to a board member's family. He asked questions instead of making accusations, and those questions landed harder than any rant ever could. That article spread faster than the video Emily had posted. People from neighboring towns shared it. County offices got tagged. Suddenly, Karen was not just dealing with me. She was dealing with attention she could not control. The county called Mark. They wanted to clarify the inspection timeline. They wanted to review internal procedures. They wanted to make sure there was no appearance of impropriety. It was amazing how quickly environmental concerns became flexible when sunlight hit them. A second inspection was scheduled, this time with a supervisor present. They walked the road again, looked at the same soil, the same drainage, the same culverts Emily had carefully planned. This time, the words were different. No holds, no red flags. Everything was within normal agricultural standards. The paperwork cleared. But the HOA did not stop. Instead, they shifted tactics. They started showing up. Cars slowed near the property line. People stood at the fence pretending to check their phones. Once, I found fresh tire tracks where no vehicle had any reason to be. Another time, someone left a note taped to the mailbox, anonymous and poorly written, warning me to know when I'm not wanted. Emily found it before I did and threw it away without telling me until later. She said she did not want anger making decisions in our house again. Mark advised us to document everything. Dates, times, photos, patterns. We turned daily life into quiet record keeping, not because we wanted to, but because we had learned what happens when you do not. Then came the meeting notice. The HOA announced a special board meeting to address ongoing concerns regarding adjacent land use. Translation: they were going to talk about me without me and pretend it was about something else. Mark suggested I attend, not to speak, but to listen. I sat in the back of the room while Karen spoke for nearly half an hour. She talked about safety, about values, about how difficult it was to lead when some people refused to cooperate. She never said my name, but every sentence pointed in my direction. Then, during public comment, something unexpected happened. Brian stood up. The same board member who had come to my door at night cleared his throat and said he could no longer support the actions being taken. He spoke slowly, carefully, but clearly. He questioned the legality of the gate, the ethics of access management, the wisdom of pushing a situation that had already attracted county and media attention. The room shifted. Karen's smile tightened. She tried to redirect, to regain control, but the illusion was cracking. Another board member spoke up, then another. Not all against her, but enough to show that this was no longer a unified front. After the meeting, people approached me quietly. Some apologized. Some said they had no idea things had gone that far. Others admitted they were afraid of being fined or targeted themselves. That fear was the real currency the HOA had been using all along. A week later, Mark called me with news that made me sit down. An ethics complaint had been filed with the county against the HOA president. Not by me, not by Brian. By someone inside the system who did not like being dragged into something that was starting to look very public and very ugly. The complaint cited conflicts of interest, misuse of influence, and coordination with private entities. Access Management LLC dissolved 2 days after that. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. The gate came down quietly the following morning. No ceremony. No apology. Just a crew unbolting steel and loading it onto a truck like it had never mattered. Karen did not come outside. The HOA sent a final letter stating that the road was never intended to cause disruption and that all previous notices were rescinded in the interest of community harmony. They did not mention fees. They did not mention fines. They did not mention the months of stress, loss, and damage. But I did not expect them to. What I did not expect was how hard it would be to relax after it was over. For weeks, every sound at night made me listen harder. Every delay felt like the beginning of something else. When power is used against you quietly, it leaves a mark you do not see right away. Emily noticed it before I did. She started leaving the porch light on longer, sitting with me at the table after dinner, not talking, just being there. Tyler came by more often, finding reasons to help with things that did not need help. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees and the road lay open and empty, Emily asked me if I would do anything differently. I thought about the gate, about the camera, about how close I came to tearing it down and proving them right. No, I said, because they wanted me loud. What broke them was patience. Paper. Proof. Silence where they expected rage. The farm survived, not untouched, but standing. And the lesson settled deep, heavier than any fine or letter ever could. Sometimes the most powerful move is refusing to play the role someone else wrote for you. And sometimes the people who look the most organized are the ones most afraid of being seen clearly. After the gate was gone and the road lay open again, life was supposed to slide back into something resembling normal. That is what everyone around us expected. They thought the problem had been removed, the conflict resolved, and the story finished. But real life does not work that way. When something threatens your livelihood quietly, through paperwork and pressure instead of fists, it lingers long after the visible pieces disappear. The farm kept moving, because farms always do. Animals still needed feed. Contracts still needed honoring. Equipment still broke at the worst possible times. From the outside, everything looked fine again. Trucks came and went. Buyers stopped hesitating. The county stopped calling. But inside the house, We moved differently for a while. Softer, slower, like people who had learned how fast stability can vanish when someone decides you are inconvenient. Karen Whitmore resigned from the HOA 3 weeks after the gate came down. No announcement, no apology, no explanation. One day her name was on the board listing, and the next day it was gone. The HOA sent out a short message thanking her for her service and wishing her well. That was it. No mention of access management, no mention of the county inquiry, no mention of the ethics complaint that quietly closed its case once she stepped away. Power rarely admits fault. It simply retreats and pretends it was never there. Brian stayed on the board for another month before stepping down himself. He came by the farm one afternoon, stood by the fence, and told me he was done with HOA politics altogether. He said it stopped being about rules a long time ago and turned into something else, something uglier. I thanked him for speaking up when it mattered, because I knew how hard that had been. People underestimate how difficult it is to stand against a group when that group controls your daily life. The neighborhood changed after that, not dramatically, but noticeably. Fewer letters, fewer warnings. More hesitation before anyone tried to enforce something questionable. Fear had been replaced with awareness, and awareness makes bullies careful. As for the farm, the financial hit took longer to recover from than I like to admit. Missed deliveries meant higher prices later. Delayed contracts meant lost trust that had to be rebuilt. Farming already lives on narrow margins, and losing weeks to nonsense you did not create leave scars. But we adjusted. We always do. Emily tightened budgets. I renegotiated where I could. We survived, not because the system worked, but because we refused to let it break us. One evening, months later, I drove the road again at sunset, the same road that had started all of this. The gravel glowed warm under the low light, and the fields stretched out calm and quiet. No gate. No camera. No sign. Just land doing what land has always done, long before HOAs and bylaws and shell companies existed. That was when it really hit me what this story was never about. It was not about noise. It was not about dust. It was not even about a road. It was about control. It was about what happens when people who are used to being obeyed encounter someone who cannot afford to comply with nonsense. It was about how authority hides behind polite language, how pressure is applied indirectly so no one feels responsible, and how quickly systems can be weaponized against ordinary people who are just trying to work and live. And it was about restraint, because the outcome would have been very different if I had given them what they wanted at the start. If I had torn down the gate on camera, if I had shouted, if I had become the character they needed me to be, the paperwork would have buried me. The fines would have stuck. The story would have ended with me painted as unstable and them painted as reasonable. Instead, patience did what anger could not. That is not a satisfying lesson for people who want instant justice. It does not feel powerful in the moment. It feels slow, frustrating, and unfair. But it works. Silence forces mistakes. Documentation exposes patterns. Time reveals who is acting in good faith and who is panicking behind a smile. I still think about the night that USB drive appeared on the fence, about the person who decided their conscience mattered more than staying quiet. Whoever they were, they changed everything. They reminded me that systems only function when enough people agree not to question them. After everything settled, Emily asked me if I would fight again if something like this happened in the future. I told her I hoped I would not have to, but now I knew how. Not with force, not with noise, but with clarity. We did not win because we were louder. We won because we were harder to lie about. And that is something HOAs and people like Karen struggle with the most. Because once the mask slips, it never fits the same way again. If this story hit close to home for you, if you have ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped, abused power, or tried to push you quietly until you broke, you are not alone. These situations happen more often than people realize, and they only stay hidden when no one talks about them. So before you go, make sure to subscribe to HOA and Karen's Stories for more real-life HOA conflicts, power struggles, and the moments when ordinary people refuse to be bullied. Like the video, share your own experience in the comments, and tell us, where are you watching from today?